Exploring the Soviet Union Dream Jobs. Dream Jobs by Setarko.
Greetings, comrades. In every era and in every country of the world, there have been prestigious and non-prestigious professions. A doctor has always been valued more highly than a simple cattle rancher. The actor's profession, on the contrary, has gone from being a despicable buffoon to an elite one. It would seem that in the 20th century, the list of prestigious and desirable professions should be about the same for any country. A banker, a lawyer, an architect. But what if I give you a list of Soviet professions that were considered the most coveted and that many people wanted to get into? A cab driver, a waiter, a TV repairman, a butcher. Let's look into why that was the case.
TV repairman. I mean, I guess that's pretty good.
Before we move on to my actual list of professions, let me say at once that I'm talking about the times of the late Soviet Union, somewhere around the 70s or 80s, and let's leave out the party workers right away. They were like a special case of nobility. It is also worth specifying that we are talking about those professions which were considered prestigious by the people and not declared as such by the state. Representatives of which were envied and about whom they said, he found his place in the sun. Soviet authorities had a slogan, all professions are necessary, all professions are important, and they promoted respect for all kinds of occupations. But in reality it was not the case. There was even a list of jobs whose representatives were often mocked, and I will present it at the end of the video. So, what exactly was so prestigious about most of the jobs I'm going to talk about today? It was not even about the respect from those around you, no. Usually it was about two factors. Either the opportunity to earn some income off the books, or the opportunity to have access to certain goods and services which were not available to mere mortals. Or just opportunities to get to know important people who could provide you with such things. Now let's move on to the professions themselves.
Sailors and diplomats. I guess that makes sense, diplomats.
In fact, no surprises here. The very opportunity to travel somewhere outside the Soviet Union was a huge plus. There were only a few legal ways for a Soviet citizen to go abroad. A tourist trip, military service, a short-term business trip, and a foreign contract. Usually it was either trips to People's Republic countries, or to socialist-oriented countries, or to various not very developed countries in Asia and Africa if you are a military man. The only bonus here was that you had the opportunity to see the world, and get paid a little more than usual. To see the countries of the decadent West, there were like only two ways. The first way is to become a long-distance sailor, a romantic profession. There was also a good salary. Sailors received about 2.5 to 3,000 rubles for one voyage, 6 months, while the average salary in the country was about 120 rubles per month. But that was not the main thing. The main thing was access to the most cherished scarce goods that were impossible to get in the USSR. Sailors supplied residents of Soviet port cities with everything from cosmetics and jewelry to not-so-legal items like weapons. Jeans, sneakers, chewing gum, tape recorders, all these rare for Soviets things were easily available to sailors.
That makes sense,
Of course it was smuggling, but that was something authorities easily turned a blind eye to, for a fee. Plus, ships were inspected a little less closely than planes, which is why it was easier for sailors to go about their business than for pilots and stewardesses, for example, even though those professions were also considered mega cool and well paid. If you want to have all the advantages of traveling abroad but are afraid of the sea or do not want to engage in smuggling, then you have no choice but to become a diplomat. And as a bonus, you get a lot of respect from people around you. You are the real elite of the country. There's only one problem. It was almost impossible to get into this profession. In fact, there was only one university to train these specialists, GIMO, the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Few people managed to get in. Most of the students were children of nomenclatura officials. But if you managed to do it, then all the doors were open to you. Not only could you buy electronics, quality clothing and cosmetics abroad, those diplomats were allowed to use the iconic Berezka stores, where they could pay in foreign currency and buy all sorts of things in the USSR that were inaccessible to mere mortals. And all the girls in the union
The mere
fantasized about
mortals.
marrying some ambassador and thus ensuring a comfortable existence for themselves. In general, it was a dream job.
Yeah, in that way, but also isn't like being a diplomat and stuff like that and politician also kind of dangerous, right? Like it seemed like it had some benefit, but also yeah, like as a diplomat, you know, going to different countries, you know, you might fuck up, say something wrong, you know, mess up a deal or whatever it is, and I feel like it's a bit of a dangerous job to an extent. Taxi driver, huh?
And with the first part everything is understandable, then the following are not so obvious professions. For example, what's so prestigious about driving people to various places all day? Now it is the most mediocre occupation, which will not bring much money, but things were different in the USSR. First of all, you had access to the diamonds of the Soviet car industry. The best cars were used as cabs, the Volgas, which were not easy to buy.
Okay.
Secondly, to work as a cab driver you had to have an extraordinary set of skills. As you understand, there were no GPS navigators, which meant you had to know the whole city like the back of your hand. And in the conditions of identical Soviet neighborhoods, it was a bit difficult.
Yeah,
Besides,
I would
cab
say
drivers
so.
had to wiggle between state law and the laws of the shadow economy, had to work for 14 to 16 hours, had to be part-time psychologists and entrepreneurs. The salary of a cab driver for a month of 14-hour shifts was about 250 rubles. Engineers got 120 for 8 hours. But that's not the main thing. The cab drivers who worked near airports and train stations, the sweetest places, earned much more.
You
There
get
were
tips.
also specialized furniture guys who maintained contacts with salespeople in furniture stores. Those would supply them with passengers for a commission, and the cab drivers, for their part, could help those who wished to find scarce goods. There were also those who took additional passengers with them without recording the fact on the meter. The extra money went directly in their pockets. And there were
I see.
dozens of methods. On average, a cab driver received between 20 and 50 extra rubles per shift, almost
Then that's
half
pretty
the
damn
average
good.
monthly wage of an engineer.
That is pretty
At
damn
the
good.
same time, the main tool for cab drivers to make money was their ability to talk to people and having the right
I didn't think of that, like, you know, putting the meter or whatever. So like, you know, you take 3 people, but you only like make one of them pay officially and the others pay you. Well, I guess you just take their money and then divide that, right? So that is pretty good.
actions in the world of smugglers, speculators, farsovщикis, and other shady personalities. Every Soviet citizen knew that if you urgently needed to get something not quite legal and you did not have the right connections, you could just ask a cab driver. He definitely knew someone.
They always know
But it is
someone.
necessary to mention that though it was considered a good place to work, cab drivers themselves were often disliked. And not for nothing. To scam a hapless passenger for many of them was often a matter of honor.
Car mechanics and TV repairmen. Huh? Okay.
Speaking of cars and repairing them, masters who could repair equipment, especially TVs and cars, were also worth their weight in gold.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is kind of like TV repairman is not even a thing today, right? I mean, it might be a thing, but like it's not a big thing. I wouldn't even know where to go to find a store where there's a TV repairman or something. So I guess you could find like some kind of electronic store where someone repair technology and maybe they could do something. But mechanic, it makes a lot of sense. How you can make more money from it. I mean, just, you know, like they bring in a car, they say they have a problem, you create more problem, and then you tell them there's this, and then you, I don't know, pocket the rest or something. It seems pretty straightforward. I guess maybe with the TV repairman it's the same, like create more problem that there was, and so you can make more money from it.
TV set in the 20th century was as important and desirable as a smartphone nowadays. And just like any other device, TVs used to break down on a regular basis.
Just slap them.
Nowadays, a faulty TV set is often just thrown into the trash, but in the USSR it was impossible to even think about such a thing. If you somehow throw away your TV, you never know when you would be able to even have a chance to buy a new one. And that is why skilled TV repairmen were making good money. Some did things rather unethically. Instead of buying original parts, they replaced them with cheap homemade constructions or inexpensive analogs, pocketing the difference. But
Right.
honest professionals also got enough money. Their contact details were passed from hand to hand, and there was no shortage of customers. As for auto mechanics, they were literally royalty. Here, absolutely everything came together. Good pay, access to the grey market of services, exchanges and contacts, and the honor and respect of other people. The ability to repair a car was one of the most respected skills for a man. And since there weren't too many car options, any auto mechanic could fix anything, which only added to his authority. At the same time, there were very few service stations back then, literally only one or two per medium-sized city. Spare parts for cars were not always readily available. Again, to have your car repaired quickly and properly, you had to know the right people. And at the same time, it was recommended to additionally stimulate the car mechanic himself. We should separately mention those car mechanics who did not work in official car repair shops, but who repaired vehicles privately for their neighbors and friends in their garages.
Yeah, that's
they
also
were
a good
probably
business.
the most honest car mechanics and the most respected. Each neighborhood had its own Uncle Vasya, who could fix any car that was absolutely dead in an hour with the help of improvised means.
There's always that one guy. Waiters, really?
Another kind of non-obvious occupation that was highly sought after. If you think about it though, it's pretty straightforward. Even now, tips make up a substantial...
Yeah, but I think there's a difference now though, right away I can say, right? Like, obviously, like, tips are a good thing, but waiters are also known for being treated like shit a lot, you know, so I guess you would want the job for the money, but it's definitely one that's hard on the mental, right?
Essential part of a waiter's salary. And what to say about the times when every trip to a restaurant was a landmark event. A Soviet citizen would go to a restaurant on major holidays, and getting into a good restaurant was not an easy task. Women wore evening gowns on such occasions, and for men, a suit and a tie was obligatory. At the same time, prices in Soviet restaurants were quite reasonable, but the tips were essential. In addition, proximity to the kitchen allowed for the proper distribution of extra food together with the cooks. In the era of protracted and total scarcity, the contents of a Soviet citizen's refrigerator depended not so much on his or her income as on the ability to acquire food, through connections with grocery clerks and store managers. And waiters had such a great source of the best and the most scarce products right beside them. As a result, catering workers in the USSR lived like cosmonauts, and they acted accordingly. If you were an ordinary person, you were approached with near disdainful attitude by the waiters.
This sounds like the absolute opposite of what you would see today, you know? Again, the tip thing is still a thing, yeah, but like, waiters are treated pretty bad, right?
After all, a waiter fared 5 times better than his average customer. Only doormen lived better than them. That was the most rewarding job. After all, it's you who decide who is allowed in the coveted restaurant and who is not. Only those who help you financially can be let in. At the same time, restaurants constantly try to cheat the customer. The portions were always smaller than what was on the menu. Cognac was diluted with vodka with caramel and tea, and if you ordered vodka in a decanter, you could easily be served alcohol that had been poured from various unfinished glasses of previous guests. But Soviet citizens did not grumble and turned a blind eye to these shortcomings, just to enjoy the delicacies, live music and beautiful interiors.
Okay. Store clerks and butchers.
The situation was very similar with store clerks and administrators. Again, it's hard to believe now, but in the days of scarcity, a salesman was a man with special abilities. He was able to get things that could not be found on the store shelves, and even things that didn't get there at all. Some goods arrived at the stores and did not reach the store front, because they were distributed immediately among the staff of the store, which then, of course, sold these products at triple the price. Or exchanged with guys from other stores. Nice boots in exchange for rare Finnish sausage, for example. Yes, again, there was always the risk of being caught, but the profit was worth it. And if you are not just a salesman, but a warehouse manager or a merchandiser, then your phone number is the most desirable thing for anyone in your neighborhood. And the gratitude from your unofficial customers increased your income dramatically. The real elite were the butchers who worked in grocery stores. Yes, in the last years of the Soviet Union, finding normal meat on store shelves was a gigantic problem. But if you
I see.
were a butcher, you could always hold on to a huge tasty piece of ham and trade the very possibility of buying it for some service for yourself. For a
Sounds
quality
good.
repair of your car, a good sheepskin coat for your wife, or a good service in a restaurant. Again, you do not exchange goods for goods directly. You only give someone the opportunity to buy something unofficially, and in return you also receive from
That's the
him
point.
the opportunity to buy or get something, just as unofficially.
It really reminds me, I guess it's probably like kind of like that in any place where, you know, someone deals with goods, but I used to work in a place where there was two divisions things going on. One was us who, you know, cut trees and stuff like that in forest, and it was kind of combined with this place where it was they would get like used goods, you know, that people throw away and stuff like that, and you know, assess them, maybe repair them, and then sell them. It was this kind of like used good processing and store place, I guess. And you know, our local was right next to theirs, even though we did obviously very different things. And yeah, like it was exactly what you expect. Obviously, there was no real cataloging of things coming in, and so you know, so many people would just take stuff they wanted, right? Like as long as it was beyond the postage, it was fine. And even myself, you know, I started talking to some of these people, you know, but you know, I wanted like mangas or anime, you know, DVDs or stuff like that. And you know, I got some good stuff out of that. I mean, one time there was a full collection of a manga, Satan 666, I think it was called. You know, which was kind of crazy to me to just like get like a free full collection like that. It was one of the people that I knew that, you know, dealt with the evil stuff and just found it and gave it to me. And also like, you know, same thing, like some of the time, you know, our team basically would start early at 6 a.m. or something. So we would be there at like the local, I guess, before everybody else. And, you know, there was all the stuff, you know, that had come in. And so like most of the people in my team, me included, would just like kind of rummage through what was there because most of the boss weren't there yet or anything. So you could just look through things and just take what you wanted. It was one of those things where, again, I guess people who, well, easier back then than now, obviously, but if you deal with goods, I guess there's some way to get some stuff and, you know, make it worth your while, I guess.
And this is how the entire shadow economy of the USSR worked. Knowing the right people was essential.
Валентина Петровна. Железнодорожные билеты. Очень приятно. Прошу. Владимир Аркадьевич. Ремонт квартир. Николай.
Okay.
Oh yes, if you are a butcher, you should know the special way of cutting meat.
What is the special
so
way?
that the meat came out the right kind. Usually specially chopped so that any piece of meat from any part of the carcass would have a weighty bone in it. Or you should know how to hide a huge joint in an appetizing looking piece of meat, so that it would take up to 2/3 of that piece. Butchers also always tried to make sure that after cutting the carcass there was always 3 to 5 kilos of unaccounted good meat, which was then sold to the right people. All the profits from such machinations went into the pockets of the butcher and the store manager.
Sweeping, fixing, and designing. Sweeping is...
But why am I always talking about selfish things? About money? Weren't there professions that were just respected? Well, except the obvious, famous athletes, actors, and cosmonauts. In fact, these professions changed from decade to decade. In the 1920s and 1930s, the aviator profession was very popular among young people, especially after the rescue of the Chelyuskinets in the Chukchi Sea and Chkalov's flight across the North Pole. And you know, the sky, it's calling.
Yeah.
In the post-war years, there was a boom in construction specialties, where the country needed well-trained personnel to restore the national economy. A civil engineer. How proud that sounds. In the late 1950s, the rise of professions related to radio and electronics. Although the USSR eventually lagged hopelessly behind the US and Japan in the race of chips, in the early years it was quite decent, and this area received the full attention of the state. In the 1970s, young people were especially eager to become geologists and geographers, because it meant a life of endless hiking with maps, campfires and guitars, flying to Baikal and Kamchatka in search of new deposits. During the same period, there was also a great increase in the popularity of scientific professions, commonly referred to as physicists. From 1930 to 1980, the number of scientists in the USSR doubled every 6 to 7 years. In the 1970s and 1980s, about 4% of those employed in the national economy were scientists.
Wow.
But there were also professions that were, sometimes unfairly, disrespected in the USSR. Professions that were almost embarrassing. It is strange because many of them required special skills, education and knowledge. Let's start with a slightly more obvious one: street sweepers.
Okay.
If you don't start...
That's why I was shocked earlier, like, I didn't realize he was saying, like, this is the least respected one. I was like, how does a street sweeper makes any money on the side? I was really thinking, like, it doesn't make sense.
Study well in school, you'll end up sweeping the yard. Probably everyone heard that from their mothers. Perhaps the aversion to this specialty comes from the pre-revolutionary times in the 1930s. Back then, janitors were often informants for the police and the NKVD, and people did not like that. Next come the plumbers, who were invariably labeled as drunkards. Fixing toilets? Oh, it means he's an...
I mean, I guess plumbers' reputation changing, you know, they used to be drunkards and now they're porn stars, I guess. They're just coming to fix your pipes, man. I see the reputation has changed quite a bit.
Alcoholic, 100%. And there was some truth to it, because the usual gratitude for a Soviet plumber for the timely repair of a faucet from the tenants was a bottle of vodka. With frequent gifts like that, it was hard to stay sober. And finally, the strangest thing is that engineers were really not respected in the Soviet Union. In fact, the problem was that there were just too many engineers because of the large number of factories and research institutes. Soviet engineers received small salaries, got practically no benefits and privileges, and were often unable to travel abroad because they had access to secret documents. There was no career growth. Any side hustle was practically excluded. In fact, it was the most unremarkable job in the entire USSR. You don't know what to do with your life? Well, go and become an engineer. Spent 35 years at some factory and now you are retired. Loser. All this despite the fact there were outstanding specialists among them.
Well, yeah.
But such was their reputation. In addition, professions such as teacher or doctor, well, except dentists and surgeons, were also not held in high esteem. Again, this is probably due to education and medicine in the USSR being free and accessible.
Oh, I see.
Cool, you teach children and you heal people, but you are doing it for free anyway. No one...
I feel like maybe the way he's putting it is maybe a bit wrong. Not that I know, obviously, but I think what he means is maybe the use of the wording is a bit off. It's like, you know, I feel like there's no way you can tell me like teachers are not respected, but I guess it's the profession itself is not respected because it just doesn't make money. You know what I mean? I think that's what he means. Because obviously, like, a freaking doctor or teacher is like super important, but it's hard work for probably like not a lot of money and there's no way to scheme on the side or something. So, fair enough.
You don't offer me any benefits, unlike knowing the butcher, so sorry, you're not that cool. Unfair, but such was life. That's why there was a joke in Soviet times. In a Georgian school, a teacher asks her students where their dads work. My dad is a sailor, and my dad is a doorman. My dad is a cab driver, and my dad works at the top research institute as an engineer. The whole class laughs. The teacher scolds them. Kids, don't laugh. The boy has enough misery in his family already. Thanks for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Steak1, Steven, Елизавета Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Zeman Berze, and Giovanni Zayas. See you guys in 2 weeks.
It all feels very like, you know, reverse on its head kind of thing. I mean, like, obviously engineer can mean a lot of things, right? There's like very high level and very low level engineer, I guess, but even then, it's kind of crazy that you'd be mocked for telling your dad is an engineer. I mean, that's kind of crazy. Okay, Good video. I enjoyed it. Very interesting how reversed some of the expectation now. I mean, obviously, like, it might have to do with, you know, the whole thing of communism and everything. But it is still interesting, yeah. I mean, today, yeah, like, you think of cab driver, you think of a butcher, like, you don't think of it like that. Huh? And I guess, you know, laws, rules, and stuff like that in different countries have evolved a lot. Huh? So I'm sure a lot of stuff like skimming goods and services on the side is, you know, much harder and less of a thing, you know what I mean? But I guess back then it was more common and so more of an actual possibility to just make more money on the side. So even if the job doesn't actually seem appealing at first, if you consider the amount of money you can make on the side from everything, I guess some of them suddenly seem a lot more appealing. It's interesting. It's interesting. Okay, well,